will be my great honor to represent our department, giving a presentation and introduce our department. And the title for my talk will be a translational science, a bridge between the laboratory and a patient. And my name is Shen Yin Song, and I represent my department, which is the International PhD Program for the Translational Science. And as everybody knows that the translation not only just doing the bench work, in which we have doing tremendous work in the basic research as well as the preclinical animal models. And however, for the most of the research, we really wish that our product or our data that can be used as a clinical trial, and eventually we can go to daily clinical practice. However, with any of the research, actually there is a death valleys in between the preclinical bench work as well as in the clinical trials. So there's tremendous of the work when we conducted that actually are failing or actually diminish during our preclinical research, but never goes to a clinical trials. And likewise, when we conducted many of the clinical trials, they just represent one of the PI or doctor actually doing a great work in the clinical trial, but never really goes to as a clinical practice. So there are two death valleys between the basic research clinical trial and clinical trial with daily clinical practice. So we need to overcome and build up a superhighway for our basic research all the way to the clinical practice basic research. As everyone knows that it takes a very, very long time for one of the new drug developed from a very beginning of the drug discovery. You may have a 10,000 of the compounds goes to a preclinical animal models. There at that time you may be able to narrow down to 250 of the compounds. Then you can submit of the IND. And today we are not going to focus on IND. And actually in my class, I will introduce how are we going to do and how are we going to prepare for the IND, including the animal toxicology, the drug toxicology preparation, as well as the outcome of the animal studies. And then you may be able to conduct it. Finally, you can go to the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials that including maybe 20 to 100 of the volunteer and about up to 500 volunteer in phase 2, then goes to 5,000 volunteers in phase 3s. Then you can NDA to claim your drugs. Then you can actually go to the FDA review, then go become a really one drug. This time takes about 15 years. Think about 15 years. You only try to develop one of the drug for a daily clinical practice. That is a time consuming. So in order to narrow down this timing, we try to build up a superhighway in Taipei Medical University. This is represent the translational research in our department. So the understanding or discovery of the biology, including we need to understanding of the disease of the interests and including the unmet medical need and understanding the mechanism of the disease and how are we going to targeting these mechanisms. And then we can identify a very therapeutic targets to do an animal study and therapeutic strategies. And finally, we will be able to develop and validate this kind of the biological assay with the whole cell, transform cells, cell-free biochemical, and so on, with many of different strategy we will be able to use for the discovery biology. In addition, the in vivo animal model will be the very useful of the translational research. So therefore, we need to have a very efficacy study to conduct more of the candidate selected drugs and to understanding which drug is more effective in the in vivo animal models, and with that we can analyze the rate of the metabolism of the drugs, and also the pharmacokinetic and therapeutics studies, and to understanding the mechanism and concentration of the drug in the blood. And also we need to understand how this to the toxicology in the animal studies. So therefore, the translational science that actually has many of the key factors, including we need to screening the drugs, and we need to understanding which special target of this drug will be, and also we need to understand the pathological of this drug may be or may not be harmful to any of our organs, and then we can use this to predict the early diagnosis of the drugs or early diagnosis of the diseases, and understanding the mechanism, and finally we can go to the clinical trials. So we are going to separate our department into several categories, represent several of the specialties in our department. So in this, we can understand in that the multidisciplinary organization of our department is not like other departments. Most of the department, they actually with one door to next door. This one study may be diabetes, the other one is study as hypertension and so on. So one disease with other disease, different professor has their own specialty of the diseases, but the organization of our department is very different. We have expertise in the drug screening, we have expertise in the animal models, and we have expertise in disease mechanisms, as well as expertise in clinical trials. So the first one I will introduce is the animal models. In our departments, we have two expertise in the animal model. One is the professor and who is conducting the transgenic mouse model for disease progressions, and the second one is PDX mouse model for therapeutic effects. Professor Yifan Chen, she is an expert in the transgenic mouse models. She will be able to conduct a knockout or knock-in animal models with different strategies, including we can use a CRISPR to knock down of the certain genes, understanding the failure of the genes may impact to the pathological and the biologicals in the animals, and this can convert into how that would be able to helping our human bodies. So commonly used for the research and animal model for human disease, and Professor Chen, she will be able to specifically designate for mechanism study and the research of the specific genes. And she is outstanding scientist focused on the aging-related disease, which she was using a transgenic mouse model for many of the aging-related disease studies, also assisting the development of the gene-related mouse model in many of other studies. So she is an expert. Whoever have a sign of a certain disease, and she go to her doors, knock her doors, and asking for help, she will be willing to help our department fellows to do a transgenic mouse and become a collaborate project. Professor Zhezhang Chang, he is an expert in PDX mouse model, which is a disease mouse model, especially for the cancer disease, for the connection between the disease and drug correlated strategies. So he will be able to implant the primary tumors into a mouse model and follow the tumor growth in the mouse animal models, and then treating animals with different drugs, and then develop a very usable drug screening mouse model for the studies. He also is an expert in the analysis of the mechanism studies, and especially in the simulation studies of certain of the proteinase degradations. So he has many of the techniques that will be able to use for a disease-oriented mechanism studies. So one of his special study in the PDX and PDOX mouse model, he will be able to use this for the children's brain medulloblastoma or the ATRT rare tumor diseases. So he will be able to see that the primary tumor he was able to implant into the mouse and grew up as a tumor, then follow up with the first and second recover, and then follow the disease progression and to identify which tumor or which clone of the tumor may be able or maybe will be one of the malignant progression of the tumor, and he can do many of the staining and represent how was doing the conducting of the tumors. And this one, he was able to represent how the tumor or the surgical tumors was isolated from our hospitals, and then we will implant into the animals with first generation, second generation, and third generations. So with comparable of the gene and genomes validations, variations, we will be able to see with the different generations which genes mutation will happen in the animal models, and then perform in many of different tumors. Here is showing a brain tumor xenograft mouse model, and these tumors were deposited into Taipei Medical University biobank for further analysis. The second one is drug screening and medical chemistries, and we have an expertise who is focused on the large-scale drug screening and validation and patient-derived drug screenings. So the one of the major idea for the drug screening is that you wish to find one of the hit target drugs that is really useful for the therapeutic strategies. In addition, this drug may be able to develop as a lead compounds for future therapeutic targets. So Professor Alex Wu, he is an expert in the drug screenings. His specialty including the molecular biology, clinical mouse models, cancer stem cells, and drug sensitivity analysis. And recently, he is focused on the preclinical efficacy and mechanism study, and specifically, his disease is focused on the colorectal cancer mechanism and nanoparticle drugs for the targeting therapy. But not to mention Professor Wu's expertise in colorectal cancers, many other diseases. When we goes to his doors asking for help for screening the drug, he is very happy to help everyone to do the drug screening and identify the lead compounds for further analysis. So once we have this drug screening and large-scale screening, then the next one is targeting therapies, especially for the cancer research. Targeting therapy is the future starts for developing a beneficial, less of the side effect, but better of the therapeutic effect for the targeting therapies. So for the targeting therapy and development, we will first focus on the mechanism-oriented drug disease development, and we have several mechanisms involved, including we can stop cancer cells growth, we can stop the blood vessel growth, and we can stop cancer cells metastasis and cancer cells death. And Professor Cai Mu Zheng, he is one of the such expertise. He especially focused on the developing of the monoclonal antibody drugs. He helping us develop many of the special monoclonal antibody drugs that will be able to target into several of the diseases. And his expertise is on the cardiovascular disease. So he recently, and with our many of other professors in hospitals, to form a team to focus on the therapeutic target of the cardiovascular studies. So his recent focus including nanocarriers for breast cancer and other colorectal ischemia, coronary ischemia studies. These are all his focus areas, but not to mention as any other professor comes to his door for asking for monoclonal antibody development, he will be very happy to help us. Again, Professor Wu, Alex Wu, he is recently focused on the colorectal cancer mechanism and nanoparticle drug development for targeting therapies. And my personally is focused on the basket clinical trial drug development. So in which we have our lab is focused on to collaborate with doctors in hospitals to use many different drugs to see the sensitivity of the patient's cancer cells when we isolate from the circulation tumor cells, and then to see which one is much better to do a therapeutic. Then we can apply these drugs to the patients and then do the special drug. And with that, we found that some of the patients actually beneficial with such as basket clinical trial drug developments. In addition, Professor Haoqing Wang, he is expert in X-ray crystallography of the proteins. This is a very important area, especially this area will be able to identify the target protein structures. And with these structures, then we will be able to use many of the computerized systems to predict which drug is the best of the drug to helping the patients. And for his specialty, he is focused on the DNA mimic protein and protein DNA interaction, virus host interactions, and also structural biologies. And his recent focus on many areas, including a protein structure analysis of several of the disease-oriented proteins, such as the PHYL1 and the PRIBVP and PRIAVP proteins in their interactions. So he will be able to identify the protein interaction and to see if we can block the protein interaction and really cure a disease. So not only just focus on his many of the biology and biomechanism studies, but also in the disease-oriented studies. That would be a very, very important and tremendous helping work in our departments. Of course, when we talking about human disease, we have to mention about the pathological study, especially for family history and omics studies. Some of the cancers, you will be able to find that some of the certain families, they have a tendency to develop certain of the cancers. So this represents a family oriented or family history that may have certain genes that are different from other genes or other populations. So the family study would be very important. One of the family study will including the GWAS study, which is the large cohort genome-wide association study of the family genomes. And our group specifically focus on the GWAS of the cancer disease that correlate with the family risk of the special cancer, for instance, colorectal cancer. And Professor Wenzhang Wang, his specialty is statistic genetics, and he also focuses on genetic epidemiology, biostatistics, and statistic computing. So he is mainly focused on the computer analysis of the genome-wide DNA mutation in the family histories and in the cohort population studies, especially his focus on the Taiwan populations for a family colorectal cancers to identify which genome mutation or variations that may impact for an entire family history to develop the colorectal cancers. An omics study is another orientations for the family history and the cohort population study. The reason is because the omics study not only just focus on the gene or genome mutations, but also the genomic, proteomics, and the metabolism, and as well as other of the phosphorylations proteins variations. So with this, we will be able to identify many of the genome, transcriptomics, proteomic, metabolomic, and the epigenomic variations in many of the populations, especially here we focus on the Taiwan and maybe Southeast Asia's population to see which computer induced computer analysis will be able to identify a certain disease and the understanding the complexity of the disease. Some of the diseases that may not be able to identify by the GWAS, but actually will be able to identify by the protein-protein interactions as well as the omic studies. And currently, I'm focused on several of the patients in the circulation tumor cells. So my lab is focused on the ready for doing the collection of the patient circulation tumor cells, and we will conduct a genome and proteomic studies. And our current project, including the profiling of prostate cancer omic data in Taiwan populations, as well as profiling a marker for lethal phenotypic cancer progressions in many of the other cancers. But not only just cancers, if you have any other ideas, come to my door. I will be able to helping you to develop some of the certain projects and to see if we can develop a certain of the omics analysis studies in cancers. And disease biomarker and early diagnosis the future starts for identify or early diagnosis of certain diseases, especially for the malignant progressions of some lethal progression cancers, as well as some of the other disease or rare disease that will not be able to identify by many of the biomarkers recently available, but we will be able to develop a new biomarkers for this disease for the predictions. One of the expertise is Professor Wei Zhongyang. She actually is our chairman of our department. She actually formed a company now to identify endometriosis, and her study focused on developing a biomarker and use this biomarker to screening of the endometriosis patients in a large cohort of the women populations. So she is currently the president and founder of the new biomedical companies focused on developing a assistance for the endometriosis early diagnosis. And personally, I am also working on the prostate cancer and bladder cancer biomarker developments, and we will use a mass spectrum analysis and develop a biomarker for prostate and the bladder cancers. So my current project, including the prostate cancer serum biomarker and circulation tumor cells biomarker for prediction of the prostate and the bladder cancers. Professor Zechang Zhang, he also used a large, he is focused on the glioblastoma, multiform, and the gastric cancers biomarkers, and his specialty also including the label a free mass spectrum analysis of serum biomarker and develop biomarker detection tool and platform for glioblastoma, multiform, and breast cancers. And currently, he is focused on the glioblastoma, multiform serum biomarker, and breast cancer, all group acetylcholine specific biomarker for the sugar analysis prediction of the cancer cell progressions. Well, for all these studies, we cannot not to mention that the disease and molecular mechanism would be the most important part for our departments. The reason is because we need to understand the mechanism prior to our disease developments. For instance, me and Professor Zhang, we are focused on the children brain tumor molecular mechanism and therapeutic targets, and also Professor Sujun Zhang, she is actually focused on lung cancer. Her study focused on the anti-cancer's role of the hiltonol in a non-small cell lung cancers. Her studies recently has published several publications. Again, my personally not only just focus on brain tumor, I also, as I mentioned before, I focus on the prostate cancer. So we focus on the molecular mechanism of the prostate cancer metastasis and tumor microenvironmental regulations. And our chairman, cancer mechanism study and glycosylation by the Professor Mingheng Wu. His specialty including the glycobiologies, fibrosis, promote liver cancers, and also ARDS, which is the acute respiratory distress syndromes. So he's currently focused on the galactin-1 roles in the hepatocarcinogenesis and drug resistance, and also mesenchymal stem cell therapy for acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, and also ECAM6 target therapies for spatial targeting in many of different diseases, including the liver cancers and the lung cancers. Again, Professor Cai Mu Zheng, his focus, as I mentioned before, is focused on the cardiovascular diseases, and he has team working with the Wanfang hospitals and focus on the future clinical trial developments for the targeting drug to target the cardiovascular diseases. And finally, for all these diseases, we need to go to a clinical trials. So managing and optimize the trials in Taipei Medical University and Alliance, we are trying to align all the trials and helping everyone to develop clinical trials. These clinical trials including a new drug, new therapeutic procedure or techniques, new device, new dose of the drug, new diagnosis of drugs, or also in the new method to improve the life of the qualities. So Taipei Medical University as ARO to organize all the trials, the prototype of the therapeutic will come to our systems in the clinical trial service, and will be helping everyone to develop PI initiate clinical trials with our audit monitor, and we can operate the clinical trials with, for your studies, and we have data management, and also we have the data safety to helping you to make sure that all the data are secure, and then we hope that all our service will be able to successfully for your product become a clinical validations. Not only just Taipei Medical University, we actually have 11 hospitals aligned as an alliance in these systems, working together to helping you to do this kind of the clinical trials. And recently, I was assigned as a dean of the Office of the Human Research. So my job was not only just on the translational research, but also clinical trial management. My focus on will be also on the, as I mentioned before, the ARO, including the administration of all the clinical trials, including the protocol development, RB applications, and biobanking, data safety, and the operation of the clinical trials in Taipei Medical University health systems. So we are building a bridge, and this is a small steps for a success of the clinical application from the bench to the bedside. We hope that this superhighway can facilitate not only our own research, but also many of the other research in the world or in the Southeast Asia to become a very success of the business models. As you can see that the global clinical trial market are gradually increased. This global clinical trial increase is not just from the big pharma, but from many of the new biomedical companies. The majority developing of new moving star actually are those of the new biomedical company. And also these new biomedical company actually are the company developing by many of the expertise, including the professor and also the scientists of students in our department and many other departments. So westernized countries, including the United States and also European, they encourage students not only just goes to the basic research, but actually wish you to focus on the translational research. You can see that current marketing of the clinical trials, including the oncologies, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, pain management, CNS conditions, obesity, and the autoimmune disease as well. So there are many of the disease actually are focused on many of different professors in our Taipei Medical University that also covering of all these different diseases in the market. So translational research is a multidisciplinary work. It's not just focused on one disease or one of special areas, but we need to be very, very open minds. So this is multi-directions. This including different category of the specialty, and we need to be a teamwork to do it together. And this teamwork need leaders. So our department not only just helping you to open your mind to see different collaboration between the professors, but also we try to building you as a leader, not the fellows. We try to building you as a king to in the market and in the translational research. In this way, we hope that you will be able to be a future stars in not only just academic, but also in the future translational marketing areas of the entire globally. Thank you very much.